When Alex Brinson bought his dream home, he expected peace. What he got was a clipboard-wielding HOA president, a war over property lines, and a showdown that would go viral across the nation. Alex Brinson had always been the kind of man who valued order, privacy, and peace. After years of working long hours as an architect in Dallas, he'd finally saved enough to purchase his dream home, a spacious two-story house on a quiet cul-de-sac just outside the city limits. The property sat on a generous half-acre lot, lined with tall oaks and bordered by a small creek at the back. What made the deal even sweeter was a legal technicality. Although the entire neighborhood was under the jurisdiction of the local Homeowners Association, his property, originally part of an older parcel, had been explicitly excluded from the HOA when it was first formed. He had double-checked the deed, verified it with a real estate attorney, and even kept a notarized letter in his records just in case. No dues, no interference, no rules, just peace. For the first 18 months, that peace held. Alex settled into a routine he cherished. He worked from home, often on the porch where he could hear birds chirping and leaves rustling. His dog, Baxter, had free rein of the backyard, and Alex had started tending a modest garden near the rear fence. Occasionally he exchanged pleasantries with his neighbors, but he largely kept to himself. That suited him fine. The HOA held its meetings, sent out newsletters, and enforced its laundry list of regulations, none of which concerned Alex in the slightest. Life was calm, measured, and entirely his own. That serenity began to shift subtly with the arrival of a new face in the neighborhood. Karen Delacroix moved into a house 3 doors down, and within a month had been elected as the new president of the HOA. She was the type of woman who seemed born to command attention. Sharp haircut, sharper tone, clipboard always in hand. Neighbors whispered about her ambition and her sudden efforts to restore standards in the community. Alex paid little attention. Presidents came and went. He had no reason to believe his peaceful bubble would be disturbed. After all, the line between his land and HOA territory was both visible, marked by a low iron fence, and legal. He didn't realize then just how little that distinction would matter to Karen, or how far she was willing to go to assert control over a house she didn't own. It started innocently enough. A knock on the door on a warm Saturday afternoon. Alex had just returned from a grocery run and was unloading bags when he heard the crisp, insistent tapping. When he opened the door, there she was, Karen Delacroix, standing straight-backed, with that ever-present clipboard tucked beneath one arm, and a tight-lipped smile on her face. She introduced herself in an overly cheerful tone as the new HOA president, and immediately launched into small talk about community engagement and upcoming neighborhood improvements. Alex, polite but wary, nodded along until she got to the real reason for her visit. "We're planning our quarterly HOA meeting in a couple of weeks," she said, eyes scanning his expansive porch and front lawn. "And frankly, your property would be the perfect venue. The house faces the main street, it's got ample space, and the lawn is just darling. It would really set the tone for a unified neighborhood." Alex blinked. "You want to host the meeting here?" Karen's smile widened. "Yes. It makes sense. Most of the other homes don't have this kind of space, and it's so visible. Symbolic, even. A statement of unity and cooperation." There was no question in her tone, only expectation. Alex kept his voice measured. "Karen, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not part of the HOA. My property is legally excluded. I checked thoroughly before buying. I really prefer to keep things private. Her smile tightened at the edges. Oh, I understand that, in theory, but you are in the neighborhood, technically part of the community. And this is a community event. Alex crossed his arms. I'm not under your jurisdiction. I don't pay dues, and your rules don't apply here. I'm not interested in hosting any events. There was a pause, just long enough to shift the air between them. Then, Karen's eyes flicked to his porch again, calculating. Well, perhaps you'll reconsider, she said, tone syrupy. Sometimes it's not just about what's on paper. It's about being a good neighbor. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked briskly down the steps, leaving Alex standing in the doorway with a faint chill crawling up his spine. Something in her tone told him that no hadn't been the answer she'd expected or would accept quietly. The first real sign that Karen wasn't going to take no for an answer came just 4 days after their initial conversation. Alex opened his mailbox to find a thick cream-colored envelope bearing the HOA's emblem in ornate gold lettering. Inside was a formal notice, a reminder of obligations to community standards, citing alleged infractions on his property. The language was vague, but ominous. Failure to comply with community expectations could result in escalating enforcement actions. He laughed at first. It had to be a mistake. But tucked in the back was a separate note, handwritten in tight, slanted script. We all have a role to play. Refusal to cooperate makes things difficult for everyone. Let's keep things neighborly. Chako ki yir di. Alex didn't respond. He filed the letter away and returned to his usual routines, though now with a sharpened awareness of his surroundings. He noticed Karen's SUV crawling past his driveway more often, her gaze lingering a few seconds too long whenever she passed. One morning, while watering his garden, he caught her standing at the edge of his property with her phone raised, clearly snapping pictures. When he called out to ask what she was doing, she responded sweetly, "Just documenting potential violations for the record." She didn't elaborate and drove away with a wave. The next week, Alex received an email from a city code inspector. It said an anonymous complaint had been filed regarding unpermitted structural elements and landscaping hazards on his property. The inspector was apologetic and professional when he came out, even complimented Alex on the meticulous upkeep. But the message was clear. Karen had made good on her threat to escalate. Determined to cut the nonsense off at the root, Alex confronted her. He walked up to her door early one evening, calm but resolute. Karen answered with an air of mock surprise. "Alex, how neighborly of you." "Cut the act," he said flatly. "You've been harassing me. I told you, I'm not part of your HOA. Your letters, your pictures, your complaint to the city. It stops now." Karen's smile vanished. Her tone hardened. "You're living in a neighborhood governed by a shared vision. Your house may not be listed on our maps, but your actions impact the community. We have expectations." Alex's jaw clenched. "I don't answer to your vision. You have no authority here." Karen stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Maybe not yet. But one way or another, you'll see what happens when people ignore what's best for the neighborhood. We'll make it official or very inconvenient." That night, Alex installed new cameras around his property. He had a gut feeling this wasn't over, that Karen wasn't just trying to assert control. She was gearing up for a more aggressive move. And Alex knew he had to be ready. It all came to a head 2 weeks later on a warm Sunday afternoon. Alex had spent the morning hiking with friends out near Cedar Ridge and returned home around 2 p.m. Pleasantly tired and ready for a quiet evening. But as he turned onto his street, something felt immediately off. Cars were lined up on both sides of the road, some parked partially on the curb in front of his house. Folding chairs were scattered across his lawn, and in the center of it, all stood a large white canopy tent with a banner reading, Oak Crest HOA Quarterly Meeting. Beneath it, a crowd of residents milled about, sipping lemonade and chatting, as if they belonged there. And at the center, naturally, was Karen. Alex's foot hovered on the brake for a second longer than usual as the disbelief set in. He parked in his driveway, barely managing to wedge his car between two poorly parked sedans, and stormed toward the chaos erupting on his property. People turned as he approached, faces shifting from casual to confused. Karen turned last, mid-sentence, and flashed a rehearsed smile. "Oh, Alex, you're just in time for the community vote on the beautification budget." He stopped dead in front of her. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" Karen's smile faltered slightly but held. "Hosting the meeting. We needed the space, and no one else had a suitable yard. We assumed you'd come around." "You assumed wrong." Alex's voice dropped. "You're trespassing. All of you. You need to leave now." A few people shuffled awkwardly. One man stepped back from the buffet table Karen had set up near Alex's garden, but Karen stood her ground, her tone rising. "Alex, let's not make this ugly. This meeting is for the community's benefit. If you have concerns, bring them to the board. But you don't get to interrupt official business." Alex narrowed his eyes. "This is private property. I've told you I'm not under your HOA, and I did not give permission for this. You're done here." Karen's lips thinned. "If you touch anything or attempt to remove us, I'll call the police." "No need," he said coldly, pulling out his phone. "I'll call them myself." But Karen was faster. With theatrical flair, she whipped out her phone and dialed 911 right there in front of everyone. Loud enough for people to hear, she declared, "Yes, I need police assistance. The homeowner is threatening members of the HOA during a sanctioned meeting. He's becoming hostile." Alex stared at her, stunned, though not surprised. A few neighbors looked uneasy now, unsure of what they had stepped into. Alex didn't wait. He called the police himself and calmly explained the situation. A group of people had entered his property without consent and were refusing to leave. 15 minutes later, 2 patrol cars rolled up. The officers took in the scene with raised eyebrows as they stepped out. Rows of lawn chairs, a drink table, a projection screen rigged on Alex's garage door. One officer approached Karen first as she practically launched into her version of events. He started yelling, became aggressive, she insisted. "We've been hosting HOA meetings like this for years. He's being disruptive and unstable." Alex, standing with arms folded by the porch, simply waited. When it was his turn, he presented the property deed, the exclusion documents, and, most importantly, security camera footage from earlier that morning, showing the entire setup being built while he was away. No permission, no communication, just complete entitlement. The officers took one look at the video and exchanged glances. "Ma'am," one of them said, turning back to Karen, "you're trespassing. This house is not part of your HOA, and the homeowner clearly did not give you permission to be here." Karen blanched. "But he lives here. This affects us." The officer was firm. "This affects him, and you have no legal standing to use his property. You can either pack up and leave now, or we'll begin issuing citations for trespassing and obstruction." Karen looked around. The neighbors were now visibly uncomfortable. Some had already started folding chairs and backing away. The tent came down within minutes. Alex stood at the steps, watching in silence as the last of the trespassers cleared out. Karen stormed past him on the way to her car. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You've embarrassed the whole association." "No," Alex replied. "You did that all on your own." He watched her drive away, jaw clenched. Then he looked at the recording on his phone, already saved to the cloud. That footage, combined with the HOA's actions, wasn't just proof. It was ammo, and he fully intended to use it. The following morning, Alex was already on the phone with his attorney before finishing his coffee. He'd worked with Elena Park in the past, a sharp, relentless civil litigator known for her strategic mind and lack of tolerance for bullies. After reviewing the footage, documents, and the police report, Elena's verdict was immediate. This is actionable on multiple levels. Together, they filed formal complaints with the local police department for criminal trespass and with the city council regarding the misuse of HOA funds and false representation of authority. Elena also reached out to the county zoning board, requesting an official review of the HOA's overreach and potential code violations stemming from the unauthorized gathering. But she wasn't done. A civil suit was prepared against both Karen and the Oakcrest HOA for property invasion, nuisance, attempted fraud, and emotional distress, with claims bolstered by video evidence, neighbor testimonies, and the pattern of escalating harassment. As the legal gears began to turn, Alex's footage went viral on a popular local Reddit thread titled "Entitled HOA President Hosts Unauthorized Meeting on Private Property. Calls 911 when caught." The post exploded overnight. Residents from across the county shared similar horror stories about power-hungry HOA boards. Local news picked it up within days. And suddenly Karen's smug face was all over the evening broadcasts, painted not as a concerned community leader, but as a petty tyrant trespassing on land she had no claim to. City officials couldn't ignore the noise. A municipal review panel launched a full audit of Oakcrest HOA's practices. It didn't take long to uncover a pattern. Karen had been using HOA funds for event expenses that conveniently matched catering invoices and equipment rentals from her personal friends. Worse, her aggressive enforcement tactics had been directed disproportionately at homeowners she had personal grievances with, including a disabled veteran and, a young couple who had dared to paint their porch teal. Under scrutiny, other board members began distancing themselves. The HOA's treasurer resigned abruptly. One former board member came forward with emails in which Karen instructed them to pressure outliers and create friction with non-compliant properties. These were turned over to the investigators and to Elena. Meanwhile, Elena's civil case moved forward swiftly. Karen was served with notice and attempted, embarrassingly, to delay the proceedings by claiming Alex had invited the meeting in a verbal agreement. Elena simply submitted the video footage from that very day, which showed Karen staging the event in Alex's absence and threatening to call the police when asked to leave. The judge immediately dismissed Karen's claim and scheduled a preliminary hearing within the month. Behind the scenes, Elena pushed for criminal charges as well. The false 911 call was now under review by the county prosecutor's office, especially after it became clear Karen had knowingly lied about the situation. The district attorney, sensing a very public win, authorized a deeper look into HOA financial misappropriation. By the end of the week, Oakcrest HOA found itself buried under inspections, subpoenas, and legal threats from multiple directions. Karen stopped appearing at neighborhood events. Her once proud HOA president sign vanished from her yard overnight. Alex, watching it all unfold, felt no vindictive joy, just a cold, righteous clarity. For every neighbor she had bullied, every rule she had twisted, every lie she had confidently spun into control, she was finally being held accountable, and he was far from done. The courtroom was packed on the day of the preliminary hearing. Reporters filled the back rows, their cameras respectfully holstered but ready, while neighborhood residents, some from Oak Crest, others from nearby communities, whispered among themselves as they waited for the session to begin. Karen Delacroix entered, wearing a stiff gray blazer and an expression of tight-lipped defiance, flanked by her attorney and two board members who had not yet resigned. Alex, seated calmly beside Elena, didn't so much as glance in her direction. The proceedings began with Elena methodically laying out the case. Unauthorized trespass, misuse of funds, false emergency reporting, and targeted harassment. With practiced precision, she submitted the security footage, the written complaints, police reports, city audit findings, and a selection of HOA emails that practically glowed with arrogance. Each exhibit was damning. The judge, a stern man with silver hair and no patience for theatrics, gave each piece the weight it deserved. Karen's attorney attempted to reframe the incident as a misunderstanding, a well-intentioned mistake. But every time he gestured toward leniency, Elena countered with ironclad documentation and calm resolve. When the defense claimed Karen believed she had implied consent to use Alex's property, Elena played the 911 recording in which Karen accused him of hostility and interfering with HOA business. The room went silent. The judge narrowed his eyes. Midway through the hearing, a witness was called. Patricia Nguyen, the former HOA treasurer who had resigned weeks prior. Under oath, she admitted that Karen had routinely overridden board votes, approved expenses without quorum, and pressured her to forge approval signatures on reimbursements. She also confirmed that the HOA's financial documents had been tampered with. Some even stored on Karen's personal laptop rather than the official board drive. The judge ordered a full audit and criminal review on the spot. Karen's composure cracked, her face flushed, and, for the first time, the righteous control she exuded began to slip. When Alex was called to testify, he kept it simple and factual. He explained the chain of events, his efforts to resolve the conflict civilly, and the moment he realized Karen wouldn't stop until she was stopped. By the close of proceedings, the court had seen enough to escalate the matter. The civil case was cleared for trial, and criminal charges were officially recommended to the district attorney. Criminal trespass, filing a false emergency report, and abuse of fiduciary duty. The judge imposed a temporary injunction on Karen and the HOA, barring them from contacting Alex or conducting any business without oversight. As Karen left the courtroom, reporters shouted questions. She said nothing. Her lawyer looked like he'd aged 5 years in a single afternoon. And Alex, quiet, composed, simply walked past the flashing bulbs, knowing the reckoning had only just begun. The months that followed were a blur of depositions, audits, and increasingly desperate legal maneuvers from Karen's camp. But the outcome had already been set in motion. The HOA board was dissolved under court order. A court-appointed administrator took over operations, tasked with restructuring the association from the ground up. Residents who had once whispered their frustrations now spoke openly. Several came to Alex personally to thank him, not just for standing up to Karen, but for exposing a system that had quietly bullied them for years. Karen herself wasn't so lucky. The district attorney formally filed charges: criminal trespass, falsifying an emergency report, and misappropriation of HOA funds. With the evidence stacked against her and no board allies left to back her up, she agreed to a plea deal. She received a 6-month suspended sentence, was ordered to pay restitution, and served a mandatory 30 days in county jail. The local news ran the story under a headline that seemed almost too fitting: HOA president brought down by power trip. Meanwhile, Alex's civil case concluded with a resounding victory. The court awarded him a substantial settlement, enough to cover damages, attorney's fees, and then some. The HOA was forced to issue a formal public apology, which was posted on their website and mailed to every household in Oak Crest. Most poetic of all, the judge ruled that Alex's property must be clearly and permanently marked as outside the HOA's jurisdiction, and that no future HOA member could legally contact him regarding HOA matters under penalty of law. With the ordeal behind him, Alex returned to the life he'd built. Not the same as before, but quieter in the way that matters. He upgraded his security system, planted a row of hedges along the edge of his lawn, and finally replaced the old mailbox Karen had once complained about with a heavy iron one. Not out of spite, but because it made him smile. One late afternoon, he sat on his porch, with Baxter curled at his feet and a glass of bourbon in hand. The sun filtered through the trees as laughter echoed faintly from a nearby backyard. A breeze rustled the leaves, carrying no clipboard-bearing threats, no passive-aggressive flyers, no fabricated community standards, just air clean. Lasterian nawan. Unburden. And his. He glanced at his phone. The viral post that had started it all had just passed 2 million views. Comments still trickled in, filled with support, admiration, and more than a few war stories from other homeowners. Alex smiled to himself, then set the phone down. He'd never asked to be the neighborhood's unlikely hero, but he didn't regret it. Not for a second.